Welcome back to the Boardroom Beat. My name is Madison DeWald. We're back to discuss the Matrix HR podcast about HR, business, and life. I'm excited to be here with Helen McPhaden today for our International Women's Day episode to discuss her amazing organization, Stardale Women's Group. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Matheson.
Yeah, great to see you again.
Yes, for sure. Always. I enjoy working with you.
Yes, me as well. We're really excited to have you here today for our International Women's Day episode. I'd love to just jump right in. We have lots to talk about. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself first and foremost, and then tell us more about Stardale Women's Group and its vision?
Okay, well, myself, I was raised in Treaty 6, Saskatchewan, which is northeastern Saskatchewan, and I considered myself really fortunate without realizing that up until I got into adulthood because my father was a visionary and my mother supported that, and our home was a revolving door with different ethnic backgrounds coming into this tiny little secular village. And that's where I was introduced to Indigenous peoples. I have very vivid memories. It was probably around the age of 3 or 4 because of my father's connections. And how did Stardale come to be? Well, it's a long story, and I won't get into the whole details, but I had moved back from Calgary, Alberta to Saskatchewan. And in 1996, I was working on projects out there for a Métis group. And a group of the women that had been my students had said, Helen, let's try to come together and offer this for more women like us, women that are poor, women that have been on cycles of dependency, that have, not very educated. So that was the beginning of how we started Stardale. And then in 1997, and it would have been February, we traveled to Prince Albert and we met with the Aboriginal Women's Council, which had been around for 25 years, because we had applied to be a local, but they also said, come up with your own name, and we were going like, oh, never thought of that. So we brainstormed and we came up with the name Stardale Women's Group, which is so significant. I mean, when you look at the Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and understanding, and you look at the study of the universe and the cosmos, but the name meant for Stardale, Star for Star City, where we would meet at the kitchen table all the time. And Dale was for Tisdale, and we would have offices in Melfort. And it also meant, it was Father Sky, Mother Earth. So that's how we came to be. And our mission statement was and is to address violence and abuse for, at that time, it was Aboriginal, it's now Indigenous girls, women, their families, their community, and to advocate and to teach life skills and literacy. So that's it in a nutshell.
Wow, fantastic. Yes, and we're so grateful to be aligned with your organization and help in any way we can. I know that you do after school programs type style twice a week, and there's a lot of activities that happen at these after school programs. So what kind of activities does Stardale do with the girls, and why are these activities chosen and important?
Okay, so I'm going to take a step back on that, Matheson. We had worked primarily with women in violence and abuse. And then it was the women that said, we really need to start looking at the girls. So, the directive is like, we need to start looking at the girls. What is that? Because the girls are not only victims of violence, they're perpetrators. And in those discussions over the next, I guess it was 2 to 3 years, we started to do a shift. And we also did 2 major research projects across Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba with many universities. And we also, at the same time, I was involved with working with girl gangs in Saskatchewan. These are little girls.
Wow.
Going to where the gangs were hanging out and so forth. I mean, I've learned so much. Sometimes, unless you pull that information out of me, I forget what I've been doing. But that was monumental in itself. So when we look at Calgary and we look at Treaty 7 and Mukinsis, Charles Weaselhead was the vice chief for 2 terms, which is 8 years. And he met me one time, just happen chance, my husband and I were flying to Ottawa, and he was flying to Edmonton, and he said, Helen, could you hold some focus groups for our young girls, because we need to take a look at the attrition rate and how come the children aren't staying in school. Well, I already knew that based on the years of work, but when you get the stats, it makes things different, right? So we held not one, but 3 focus groups at Satina, and there was 20 women and myself. I was the facilitator. The other women were all Indigenous. There was 2 educational consultants. There was superintendents, directors, and principals in education. So you had a powerhouse of First Nations, highly educated women.
Wow.
And we worked back and forth, and it really does substantiate our model and the need for education to keep the girls in school. The saying education is the new buffalo, that's already old. I think that was around like 20 plus years ago. But we keep saying it because education is pivotal. And how do we keep the girls in school to graduate so that there's an uptake of more educated young females? Because we need that. And then that's going to start to change the dynamics in the family and in the communities. So that's a pivotal piece. And that's the underpin, if you realize what we're doing here. And then activities. Okay, so what those women said in those focus groups are, here's the activities we would like to see done. And so it will help solidify where we need to go in the next step so that the girls are becoming educated. And again, our model is based on the medicine wheel. So it's based on the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being of the child. And that makes a heck of a lot of sense because that is the Indigenous way of being. Put yourself in my shoes when I have to write proposals for funding and people don't understand it. So I'm always having to rejig these things. But that's the reality. That is what it is, right? Mm-hmm. So cultural is a big piece. And if we can do authentic cultural teachings, and that's not always easy because you've got to find the right people. And sometimes people are, and I'll use this terminology, they're too Western or too Christian based. Right. And, some people do it with great intention, but they really don't have the true teachings. And so I've always had to sort of circumvent and go this way and that way to try to get the right people in place for the girls. Activities, as I said, are cultural. That can be, beading. This coming weekend, we're doing 2 big workshops in ribbon skirts. So then out of that, they're transferable skills too, right? Rattlestick making, different kinds of leather work. The girls have made their drums. We also have an all-girl drumming group. That was just happened generically. We didn't expect that to happen. We do other things around safety because it's about prevention. Our model is about prevention.
Absolutely.
And so when we look at our cohort, what do little girls, 10 to 13, like the 13 to 15-year-old, and then the girls up to 17, what do they like? So we have to take those interests in. So I do focus groups every winter to see if we're on the same track. Like, we just don't do this willy-nilly, right?
No.
And we're really fortunate to have some great partners over the years because this is a community-based NGO, a small charity. You can't do it in silos. Again, I go back to my village mentality. When something had to get done, everybody chips in. And in building Stardale and sustaining it over the years, you might have 1 or 2 partners, and all of a sudden you're going to do a new activity. It's like, okay, where do we go? So it's like cold calls. And then you bring more people in and more people. So we have an actual large network of people that, depending on that activity that we're doing, you just pick up the phone and say, hey, community kitchens. The girls are going to be doing these community classes. Are they available at such and such time? Can we come in with chefs or cooks and do these classes? So yeah, it's a variety, I guess.
Amazing. Well, thanks for giving us some of that input because I think that if people are not from those cultures or have not interacted with groups such as this, they're not understanding exactly what this means. So thanks for stepping back and providing that overview. I think that's really important for everyone everyone listening here. I think the next natural step with what you've brought up is to tell us, of course, what you can with respect to privacy and appropriateness about the girls that participate in your program, and why has this group been so important to their success?
Number one, in Calgary, Mohkinstsis, we address a gap in services for after school.
Yeah,
And that's been the premise since we started. So we also know, if you look at research and stats, that the critical hours are after school. That's when children, can get into difficulties.
absolutely.
There's so many ways of looking at that. If a parent or parents are working, if children have peer pressure, if there's bullying, there's different ways. So kids get into trouble, right?
Absolutely.
It can happen. So how do we keep the girls safe? How do we engage them? So that's why we have the classes we do. And I have to stop there too. I've heard this forever in my career, and it's also on some of our short films. We speak about this when we're doing presentations with our films or whatever doing in the community about the safety of the girls.
Mm,
Generally speaking, most Indigenous girls are afraid.
absolutely.
And that's very loud and clear to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. This is what we speak about all the time. And the girls here in Calgary, it's like, if they live in the same neighborhood or even if they have to bus it, it's as soon as school's over, it's like run to the house. They run to the house because they're afraid of being taken away. And today, the safety issues around trafficking and luring have been ramped up so high. We have to be on alert, and the general population should be on alert. And you need to be aware, whoever's listening to this is how these girls think. Their families have taught them, be careful. I'm a non-Indigenous woman. I've been careful most of my life. I've had to
Absolutely.
be. But when you're a little Indigenous girl, can you imagine having to live in that fear? That's a whole fear factor that they live in.
Debilitating.
So I share this information as to the importance of why we do what we do and to understand and know it. So we have our programming in place to address several needs in the community, and theoretically, and people have come to us, this could be used all across the country because, it's why reinvent the wheel? We have something that works. We have dedicated workers, volunteers, not unlike yourself, that come into Stardale. They'll pick up the girls from their schools or from their place of residence. They bring them to the program. We feed the girls. Now, because they're a vulnerable population, again, through no fault of their own, and some of the girls are in foster care or group care, which is foster care, right? So, and it's about building friends for the kids and learning these activities, but we always feed them a hot meal. And I know how difficult things are as of late because of the inflation and the economy, and many of the parents and guardians are just struggling. The
Oh,
bare bones to pay the rent, the bills. Well, so then how do you feed the kids? We hear it. They tell us this. It's not me making up these stories. You're aware, and then you hear this, you hear what's going on. So we feed the girls a nutritious meal. Any foods left over, always, always, always go home to the families. And we also do incentives, what I call draws at the end of the class. And many times I put food there so that at least, whoever gets the draw, they've got food to go home. So there's method in my madness of why I do what I do, I guess. And then we have the class, whatever, the teachings are. Right now, one of the projects we're working on is in mental health. The girls are through and then they're taken home. And then we've got our workers that do other activities in the community with them. They'll take them, to do homework club. They'll take them, out hiking, things through other groups if there's activities in the community. So we keep the girls engaged at all times. And at the same time as we're trying to keep them engaged, they're learning new skill sets. And when I look at, and I was just this morning looking at some reporting that they've done, they love it. They love learning all the things that they learn and getting to meet other Indigenous girls. So, yes.
Well, it sounds like, and we've been there, this past month, and we'll be coming back in March to cook a meal. But what I noticed when I was there is it's such a safe space, for these girls and around people that genuinely care about them, which is so important for every human being, but particularly these girls in very vulnerable positions. So we certainly, appreciate that so much, and it's why we want to support in any way we can. I want to go back to something that you talked about a little bit with the initial focus groups you did in Calgary, and how this relates is hearing about some of the women who have inspired you in this space. Are there any women that Stardale has worked with or consulted or found inspiration from that have been particularly impactful? Since it's International Women's Day, I think this would be
Yeah.
a beautiful thing to hear about.
Well, and this lady's she's passed. She actually worked at the city of Calgary. And I was a summer student, and her name was Oya Orel, or Oil Ozel. And she was in the special project planning department, and she mentored me. And then she was also years later involved with Stardale. She came out to Melfort. She evaluated. She worked on projects because one of her degrees was in anthropology, and she was always amazed to see the similarities. And she would use the words, the energies from days gone by, and she was going into all these anthropological books, and she could see the similarities to what the art-based projects the women at Stardale were. This was the weavings, and how this was done in Anatolia and Peru, similar projects hundreds of years ago. So it was like, oh my gosh. So there was Oya. One of the ladies that's inspired me is our elder, Wanda First Rider.
Yes,
I've
wonderful.
known her 39 years at least. And she's just a sweet, lovely lady. And to be able to work with someone like her, and she was in our focus group, way back at Sutina. Another lady that inspires me is Dr. Linda Meniguns, because of Linda's experience here in, Blackfoot territory, and her teachings and her education. It's been extremely helpful for me. Another friend is Dr. Marie Baptiste. She's Mi'kmaq and University of Saskatchewan. She headed up the Native Indigenous education. And then her husband, Sake Youngblood Henderson, who is an American Indian. So, and I'd have to probably stop and think more. But it's those women, and there's been so many more, the women that worked on the Stardale model. And, I love working with groups of women, with teams of women, and because we're really quick, we come up with ideas, and yeah, this is going to work. No, this isn't going to work. And it's just back, forth. So I love it. I think that's about it for now, but there's lots out there that have been really wonderful to work with over the years.
Absolutely. Well, like you said, it's a community, it's a village, it's like a beautiful tapestry of different people's love and passion and empathy and efforts. Like it's so amazing to hear about, and that's why I thought our viewers would really be inspired from this story on this day. So, Stardale has been in operation for many years, as we discussed. Are you able to share some success stories of the program?
Oh my gosh! Again, I need to stop and think for a sec. I guess I'll start where I'm at right now, because this is my mime today. Yeah. I would say the drumming group for sure. Like when we did the drumming workshop, which was during COVID, and I'll explain how we operate it, because we did everything mindfully, respectfully, and by the book. First of all, our organization is a sisterhood. All ages, right? All colors, doesn't matter, because our planet is that way. And it's important to build the relations amongst all of us and with nature and more. And when COVID happened, several things occurred. Number one, we were to be having a gala And we had been doing, developing a script. The girls' words went into a script. Eugene Stickland had put it together. Well, the gala couldn't happen, so we had all those materials. Also, we had to do a shift in how we would operate and to keep the girls together in the kinship because they couldn't even see their own families. It was almost like, when I think about it now, Matheson, it was like mourning. It was like grieving because it was such a loss. And so the girls, we were getting medical supplies for the girls. My garage floor was all cleaned and papered, and people were doing collaborating, but independently, bringing food in, meal kits, you name it, we did it. And we were teaching the kids how to work online, because even the older girls had email addresses, but didn't know how to work on email. They had no clue if we were going to sign in on Zoom or Teamworks. So there was a lot of changing things. And we had the drumming workshops. They were 3 full days, 2 different weekends, to teach the girls how to work with the hides that the animals gave their lives. What did that look like? And it's hard work making those drums. It is not easy. But the girls that were at Stardale at that time, again, God bless those girls. I just love them. They just come together. They do what they do. And at the end of it all, Chantel had them sing. And she's got the most beautiful voice. And it was like very quiet. And then somehow back there, meaning back in Stardale, the girls are drumming because they had their drums. The youth workers would have them out into the community at little parks or whatever in small groups, because we did everything, I think it was 5 to 1. They would be drumming, they would be singing. And it wasn't until June of that year with graduation, and all of a sudden they were saying, "Can we drum, Helen? Can we drum?" Well, sure. Well, they got up on that stage. I was in tears. Almost everybody was in tears. Nobody could believe it. It was like they were singing, and it was and because it moved the audience so much, that was just the beginning of it all. So that's one success that I can think of. And it's gone on since then. Like even this Thursday night, we're at a gala. The girls are drumming, and they love it because it heals people when they listen to it. They're traditional medicine songs. And as I'm thinking through, another success has been The Road, more so than the other short films, but The Road, because that short film came out of COVID. It was, for a stage performance. Then Eugene wrote it a little bit differently. Vanessa, who is our film director, she said, "Oh, I'll take this on." And again, watching all the protocols, having, Helen Young on set. She was working with the girls with their voice, because these are young girls. They've never done anything like this before. Well, The Road has won, I think, 7 awards now in Canada and the United States. Wow. So, I mean, it's profound. It's really profound. And another piece that I'm really, really proud of is the Sacred Weft Project, returning the voice to the women. And we did that in Saskatchewan. It was a revival of the West Coast Salish weaving, because the women had been the master weavers prior. So I'm going to look at the late 1800s, when Victoria and then the island started to really change with the military and with the government. And so then that changed. The women were no longer the master weavers, but those that knew how to weave. Then they switched it around to the Cowichan sweaters. And again, I can tell you story after story because I did all the research. And the Sacred Weft collection was in the Glenbow Museum for 5 years. It was in the Legislative Building in Regina, in their gallery. It was in Wanuskewin Historical Park in Saskatchewan. I've taken it to Europe, to an all-women's international conference. It was in Madrid. There was 2,500 women. I'm just trying to think. So the Sacred Weft collection, that beautiful collection of intricate weavings, that's another, a defining moment for me.
Absolutely. Well, and it sounds like there's small successes all the time as well, as you're seeing the girls grow and connect and become confident and have that safe space with you guys. So there's those big things, and then there's those micro successes as well that you're always having. So it's really great to hear the big picture as well. And I would love to go more into the recent documentary that has been made by Stardale. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, and it's interesting because I talked to the director this last weekend, and he wants to make another little change, and I'm going, oh my gosh. And he says, well, it's the creative process. And I'm thinking, because I love it the way it is. And as I said to them, like, I just take direction, you know, and that's how I've operated Stardale. When you have a project that you're developing, hopefully you pull in the best of best people. And those projects don't last like a week, they go for months, right? Because you really want positive outcomes. And I let whomever is in charge of that project, managing and supervising, the lead instructor, you have to have faith. And I learned that from the Indigenous people. You have to have faith. You know, sometimes I have to step in because I have to do what I have to do, but you have faith and let that happen. And oh my gosh, that's why we've had that success all the time. So warrior women came from a word I guess I used when I was being interviewed. I want to see strong female warrior women. And if you listen to what I've been saying is, you know, the women that help propel Stardale forward, the focus groups, the different committees, the boards, whatever. We want to see Indigenous female leaders because back in the day, the women were the leaders. This is called the rise of the matriarch. And this was predicted hundreds of years ago that this time this would happen. And so again, it just happens at Stardale, and then you're so, okay, this is what we're doing, without sometimes even realize you're doing it. You're in those trenches. I call it a cultural revolution right now. And so Warrior Women is the story of Stardale. It's an hour documentary. It's been directed by Gerald Auger, who is Treaty 4, who worked in Hollywood for 22 years and then was called back. He's an extremely spiritual individual. He's also a medicine man. His lineage and his family is medicine people. And I'm honored to have him as a friend and someone who can give me guidance and advice when I ask for it. Sometimes I may not want to hear it, but it's there, right? That's what friends do. And so we had made an application to a department, and we got the funding. But unfortunately, they wanted to really steer it the way they wanted it and to have such control over it. And there was other factors, and it was, no, we're not going to work that way. We don't work that way. Like, we want to share. This is what we do. So Gerald and I spoke, and Stardale had so much footage. You know, we're 27 years old. We had The Road, Shadows and Time on Racism, A Light in the Shadow. Then, and it was bugging me. Where is this? Where is this? The Talking Quilt that I did back in 2000 in Melfort, Saskatchewan. And you can see on the quilt, and you hear the women that went to residential schools talking about the atrocities they went to. So again, this is not a new thing, right? You know, like someone looked at that and they saw it because it's up on our website, and they thought, this is just like today that people are talking about. Well, we were talking about this in 2000, right? So that speaks volumes right there, doesn't it? So we had that. Then Gerald and his Escapio, which is Ben. Ben works with Gerald, and Ben's background is robotic engineering and the film industry, and he's worked at Banff Center of the Arts, so forth. So Ben works alongside Gerald, and then they were shooting a lot of footage. This is last year. They put everything into this 1 hour documentary, and there was so much footage, and we did a private screening of it. Schlumberger Canada sponsored it, and it was on November 29th, 2023, and it was private screening at the Ampersand. And, you know, that's when I first saw it. And I was sitting there next to our elder, Wanda, first rider, and her grandchildren, and like others were standing behind us. It's like, oh, like I had no idea. And like, you literally have to see it. And people in the audience said, you've got to see it at least 3 times. There's so much information there. And it features Wanda, her warrior woman as a little girl put into residential school at the age of 4, the impacts in her life story. It talks and features Brooke Strong Eagle, who is Pasqua First Nations, Treaty 4, Saskatchewan, and Brooke, or we call her Brookie, she's a sweetheart, went through Stardale. She's still part of Stardale, and what she learned. And as Gerald said a few weeks ago to an audience, he said, Brooke is just 18. She was 17 when we did the shooting, and she has lived the life many 50-year-olds would live, and she never complains. She just never complains. I wish more girls were like that. And then there's me. And so we're the warrior women, if you will. So the different generations, how we're intertwined at Stardale. What are the messages around Indigenous women? As I mentioned, the rise of the matriarch. What does that look like? Violence and abuse, homelessness, vulnerability, poverty. We don't get into all the politics. I could go there. I don't want to go there, because we live the nightmare. We live it, and it's just so unfair. It really is extremely unfair.
Yes. Well, and I think this is a perfect time to ask my next question. So we have talked a lot about what inspired you to take this mission on and start Stardale, but what is your vision for other women who may be wanting to pursue a similar career or help women and girls in this space? What is the advice you can give them?
Well, and it's interesting you asked that too, because I just had one of our volunteers from the U of C approach me last week on that very fact. And it's fairly ongoing. How do I get into this field? What do I do? Mine was a calling in life, and I realized that. And that is my passion. My work is not easy. It's complex. I literally do 4 jobs, and you don't shut yourself down. You might want to, but it's too hard because the needs are so great. And I remember being at a conference. I've been at so many conferences, and I think it was all women again. And she was Indigenous and saying, for my people, social workers, we would need a social worker for every person in this country, for every one of the Indigenous people, because of the tragedies that have happened and those trauma, and they're resonating more and more, and we're seeing it because the cracks are breaking more and more. And yes, we're talking about it like in this podcast, so I thank you for that. For, women, the universities teach what they teach. I can't really comment on that. I've got some friends that are professors, and I'm glad to hear that. I also think that some of the universities, with what they're teaching around Indigenous studies, that encourages women to say, oh, maybe I should, study more and get into this field. But they really don't know how. And that's why always people will come to Stardale as, the stepping stone. Can we come in? Can we volunteer? And I also stop there, because often people that come to Stardale have a hidden agenda. And then it's like, oh, well, here's an idea. Maybe you should be doing this. Here's another idea. Or can we do this research project? It's no, 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 no. No, we have a very strong framework of delivery that we have tested for years. I have consulted personally and worked in Indigenous communities way before even starting to work at Stardale. And I have listened to what the people have said. You look at OPAC and who's going to, keep the research, for instance. How is it going to be stored? What's going to come out of it? Who owns it, right? And what these individuals have said to me is, we have been researched to death. So research to implement programming, policy, which changes about every 5 years. Nothing ever gets done. And when you want to get involved with the Indigenous community, you really have to understand. And sometimes the best way is you come, you sit, you listen, you learn. You don't jump in with everything that you've been taught, because lots of times what you've been taught isn't the right stuff. And I just hear it again. Oh my gosh, I've been volunteering here a month and I've learned more than anything in all my studies. Like, even now, when people are doing Indigenous courses at the U of C or MRU, I'm looking at those two in Calgary, you've got to get hands-on. This is experiential learning. You've got to get in there and you got to work and you got to help. There's no magic way of doing this. Source out, find the right organizations or businesses. You've got to know how to approach. And even when you approach, there's not the white way of doing things. There's a different way of doing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it sounds like for what you've said is get involved directly and listen. Don't impose your own ideas, strategies, viewpoints into it. And I mean, that's a way of creating right relationships. So thank you for that advice. I think that's very important. And I think sometimes also people have kind of this savior complex as well. They say, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to have all of these solutions, I'm going to be able to offer something. But really, sometimes all you have to do is, like when we came to you, we just said, okay, what is it that you need from us? Like, I don't know what you
Yes,
need, what can we do? And you say,
yes,
well, we need
yes,
food.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
having that communication. So I think that's very very helpful advice for the people listening to this that might be interested in your types of organizations or work. So sadly, I'm at my last question. It's been like a smooth conversation. It feels like we've just been talking for a couple minutes, but we're about 40 minutes now, so we want to make sure that we wrap up pretty soon. But I think this
Okay.
last question is extremely important for what we want to do with this podcast. We want to raise awareness. We want to call out to our connections about supporting Stardale. So, what would you like, industry, corporate, or the public to know, and how can they offer support to girls in the community and to Stardale?
Okay, great question, because we were just discussing this on the weekend. I love how this all goes, isn't it? Just one thing
Yeah.
to the next, so it's great.
Yes.
We always need support, and I'll explain that too. Over the years, and this is this misunderstanding that the general population think that Indigenous people get all this money, that this
Mm,
money just comes from, you know, INAC. It's just there. That is never the case, because it always depends on your tribal council, your bands, how much money is allocated, the economic development, if your status, non-status, or Métis. So it's all these different divisions, right? And the Indigenous women, here I'm talking about the rise of the matriarch, the Indigenous women, they were the business women. They were the ones hundreds of years ago when the paleface came over, from a patriarchal, very Christian-based society, and deemed our first people as, I forget how they looked at them, but, not the way that they're supposed to be looked at, somehow through the lens of a patriarchal system. And
mhm.
so it was the women that, knew how the business, they knew the trap lines, they knew the trading. It was the women that would often go off with these men to show them the routes and the trade routes. So we've got to remember that the women genetically have that business sense in them. And for us, trying to operate Stardale, through the years has been a challenge. 3 years ago, we almost shut the doors. Thank goodness for, a really good story put on CTV. Otherwise, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you right now. And that was because oil and gas, the government had changed in the province at that time. And so oil and gas was not doing the business that they used to do. And they often are the people that help support Stardale,
Mhm.
and I'm pretty good at piecemealing, 1,000 here, two, three, four. We were getting nothing. And, we survived. Obviously we survived. And Indigenous women, any programming in this country, we just don't get the funds. We just never have.
Mhm.
So we need funding. And right now, one of our most important pieces that we need funding for is to shoot our next short film, which we want to start in June, all of July and August. And we don't have a name, obviously, because we're still writing it. So when you were all there, the girls were working with the playwright Eugene Stickland
Yes.
and poet, author, so forth. And he's very connected to the Indigenous community. He grew up in Regina, which is now, the hood, the hard, the most difficult community in all of Saskatchewan, but all of Canada too. And he has a very deep understanding and is excellent. And I do mean excellent in working with our girls because, here's a gentleman who's highly educated, works at university levels, with Alberta Theatre Project's artists and residents. I can't say that word, for 10 years. And so he comes with all this experience and he works with the girls. They in turn give him the information. He writes it into a script, but it's their stories. So everything we do, it's their stories. It's not him sitting up here directing and creating a story, from a young Indigenous girl's perspective. He doesn't operate that way. And that's why we've been able to produce what we've done. So right now, the girls are, and this will be the last month, they're writing and they're working with him. This is a transferable skill at school because we see that. The
Mm.
teachers tell us how much better they are at writing and understanding. It's the
Mhm.
storytelling, the Indigenous storytelling, right? And then next month, we have Analia Gilbertson in, who works on the stage. She works in Broadway.
Yeah.
She'll be working with the girls on lines, voice, and so forth. So we got two top-notch people here. As I always say, this is not Mickey Mouse. I want the very best for these kids. And then we need to shoot. And so we need to raise at least $30,000, like
Wow.
in the next month, like fast, 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 so that we've got that capital together and we can start the actual film shooting because we have to pay, director, the grips, location, hair, makeup, editing. Like it's a lot of work.
Mhm.
And the theme is on mental health, which encompasses suicide, because suicide is very, very high within our Indigenous cohort in Canada, more so than any other.
Mhm.
It talks about, bullying and violence, and it's paying homage to Aaliyah Meltingtallow, who had been part of our organization and died tragically December 13th, 2023. So this is in memory of Aaliyah Meltingtallow,
Mhm.
who suffered from mental health. And and she is in our other short films and in our Warrior Women documentary. Like you can't miss her. She's everywhere. And it's really important that we do this.
Awesome. Great. Well, our condolences once again. I know that we've discussed this privately, but we reach our hearts out to her family and your organization. And it sounds like a beautiful way that individuals can support her, living memory. And I think, Helen, are you still looking for meal sponsors as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. And
Okay.
that's something, the idea of someone bringing in a meal, either cooking it on site, bringing it in,
Hmm.
if an organization could do that or a business once a month, plus you get to be around the program and you
Yes.
can see what we do with the girls. And it's a win-win because the girls, who are these people? And they might come up and ask questions. And,
Hmm.
following one of your questions that you asked earlier, like, how do I get involved in the Indigenous community, especially if you're a young woman? Um, that's how you can bridge yourself in.
Yeah. Well, and food, as we know, is such a connector, such an opportunity to share space and a gift to someone, right? It's
Yeah.
such an offering. So we would absolutely encourage any of our corporate partners or anyone that may be listening that has the capacity to consider this. And if you need support, we'll link Stardale's page here, but you could also reach out to me or our page, and we can put you in contact. So whatever needs to be happening, or if you're an individual, I know there's some individuals that could have capacity to help in that regard as well. So please reach out to us or Stardale directly on any of these matters, and we'll make sure to get you in touch with them. So Helen, that's already the end of our time together. I know I'll see you in a few short weeks when we're back to cook dinner again, but it was such a pleasure to share this space with you. And I know that you're a very busy woman, so we appreciate you taking the time to tell your story and tell the story of these girls on International Women's Day. I can't think of a better time to discuss this story. It's Women's History Month, and you're currently making women's history, which is so important. And we're really excited to have had this conversation, and we hope that everyone has enjoyed. Please download, like, share, leave a review, and circulate this to your friends. And if you have it in your heart and in your capacity to donate or get connected with Stardale, we would absolutely encourage you to do so. Reach out to myself or to them directly. We'll have links in the bio on all of that. And thank you so much for listening. And thank you again, Helen, for your time.
Thank you. It's been lovely as always. Thanks.
Thanks. Awesome.